I wanted to talk to you today about relational trauma. Now, to me, this is so important because I had no idea what this was for decades of my life. But what I did know, I was raised as the scapegoat in my family. I had possible borderline narcissistic caregivers, and I found myself in repetitive relationships with the same kind of unhealthy personality. And because I didn't understand relational trauma, I was really focused on the other person. I thought the way to heal was to learn about those dynamics of the other person. And then that would help me to understand what I went through, which is true, which it did, and that it would help me to heal and avoid unhealthy relationships, which it didn't. And the reason for that was because in order to do that part, I had to start looking within and understanding what happened to me and how to help myself. And that's where relational trauma comes in. So that being said, let's dive in. For those that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a trauma-informed coach. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, and I'm the founder of the School of Transformation, which currently has a 40% off sale good through January 15th. This is a monthly membership where I consider this like nervous system gym, where I meet live on Zoom with survivors of emotional trauma from all over the world, and we do the inner healing work together. So if you're looking for a resource like that, make sure you check out the link above. So relational trauma is created through relationships that lack safety. It's the psychological harm that's caused through relationships that aren't stable, where there's not real care, where there are different forms of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, psychological. It could also be relationships where there is neglect or inconsistent caregiving, where maybe your parent loves you one moment but is raging the next. And so as a result of these experiences inside of a relationship, what you experienced in that relationship that caused the trauma often becomes like the template through which you enter all other relationships. And it doesn't matter if the other person is toxic or not. That's the scary thing, but we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So 4 key points that you want to remember in reference to relational trauma. So the first thing to remember is that it originates in a relationship. There are a lot of things that can cause trauma. Getting into a car accident can cause trauma because remember, trauma isn't what happened to you as much as what you now believe about yourself and the stuck survival energy that is stuck in your nervous system, right? So if somebody has a car accident and they don't have trauma, then they drive after that accident and they're fine. But if they do have trauma, they never drive their car again. Why? Well, the trauma is the belief that they may have now that I'm not safe. Something bad is going to happen. And the amount of fear and survival energy that got kicked on and didn't get processed is still in the body and keeps them from moving forward, right? But that's just an example that trauma can come about from so many different things. But in this case, when we're talking about relational trauma, we're focusing on what happens inside of relationships. Unlike single incident traumas where it can be one thing that happens, one huge thing that happens that can often create PTSD, relational trauma is often the result of the everyday chronic stress that relationship has created, and that can often create complex PTSD. The second point to remember is how much relational trauma impacts your ability to form healthy relationships. So oftentimes, remember I said before, it doesn't matter if the other person is toxic or not. If you have relational trauma, one of 2 things often takes place. You either wind up in another relationship with somebody that replicates the dynamics that created the original relational trauma. So for example, if you had a narcissistic parent, you might find yourself in a relationship with somebody on the scale of narcissism. Maybe your parent wasn't overt, but you find yourself with a covert narcissist. If you had an alcoholic parent, you may find yourself in a relationship with an alcoholic. If you had an emotionally unavailable parent, or even a parent that neglected you, you might find yourself with somebody that's emotionally unavailable and replicates that same level of neglect. This is often called repetition compulsion, where it's almost like our unhealed wounds are compelled, and it's almost like they come alive around people that replicate that same dynamic and push us into relationships with them. I kind of view it like a computer that's trying to reboot, right? It's like it's stuck in a loop and it's constantly trying to reboot itself to get it right. Well, our nervous system can be like that as well. It's like, ooh, here's another opportunity. Somebody similar. Maybe this time we can get it right. And so when we have that unhealed relational wound inside of us, we can have all the knowledge we want about toxic people, and our body, our wounds will feel like they take over and are able to push us to do things or get into relationships that our mind is like, what are you doing? But our body is like, oh no, we have to do this. Right? So that's one thing that could happen, or the flip side of that can happen as well. I've had different clients describe it in different ways. For example, I had one client tell me, in the relationship I'm currently in, my spouse is emotionally unavailable. But in my last relationship, my spouse was completely emotionally available. I was the one that was emotionally unavailable. In other words, when you find yourself in a relationship with somebody healthy and you have a relational wound, you can almost be flung into the flip side of that and replicate the toxic person that hurt you, and the person you're in a relationship becomes the recipient of the treatment that you endured in childhood. I had another client tell me that when they were around their narcissistic parent, it brought out the best in them, because after all, in childhood, they had to be perfect. But when that personality wasn't around, this person said, I thought I had to become it. Right? Because if your only reference point to relationships is having one person that's an abuser and the other person that's the abused, and there's never been a healthy relationship pattern for you to follow, you're going to flip between the two until you heal this wound. That's why this topic is so important. Yes, we can learn about toxic people, and it's important to understand toxic behaviors in others, but we need to understand the relational wounds in ourselves so that we don't accidentally recreate relationships that just aren't healthy for ourselves or the other person, and or obviously any children that are involved. If you're wondering if you have relational trauma, here are some symptoms that you can look for, and then we'll go into what to do about it. So one symptom is having difficulty managing your emotions. For example, you might feel very numb, or you might have a lot of emotions, but find yourself flinging up and down in between anxiety and depression and have difficulty regulating your emotions. 2, you might have physical symptoms. You might suffer with headaches. You might have digestive issues, chronic pain, a lot of muscle tension, and sleep disturbances. 3, your mental health may be struggling. You might be fluctuating between depression and anxiety. You might struggle with self-esteem problems and even substance abuse. 4 are relationship difficulties, difficulty forming and or maintaining healthy relationships. You may struggle with a fear of abandonment and feel dependent on others in order to feel good about yourself. 5, your self-image might be affected. You might have poor self-esteem, lack of self-confidence, and difficulty becoming independent. 6 is avoidance. You might find yourself avoiding people, places, events, or situations that might remind you of the trauma. 7 is learning. It may be difficult to learn and or retain what you are learning. 9 is coping. You might have difficulty managing your emotions and engaging in healthy coping skills. And so you find yourself being flung between your fight, flight, freeze, and fawn trauma responses. And then the last thing you might notice is that you wind up getting very enmeshed in relationships. In other words, you have a difficult time maintaining personal boundaries. They become very blurred in intimate relationships. I'll tell you how this information helped me. Okay, when I first started healing from relational wounds from childhood, my focus was on the other person. In fact, I started a YouTube channel all about manipulation, emotional manipulation, psychological manipulation, and narcissistic abuse. And that channel's done really well, and I'll leave the link there if you want to check it out. I still post information, and I'm very proud of that channel because it really helped a lot of people to learn that there was something going on that was causing a lot of the chaos in their lives. A lot of the problems that they were experiencing were being caused and provoked purposely by someone else. So I'm very happy for that information. But I'll be honest, as I was healing, at one point, no amount of learning about the other person and what happened to me helped me to shift and fully heal out of this traumatized personality that the relational trauma had created inside of me. No amount of knowledge of the other person and the original trauma helped. Actually, let me rephrase that, because it was a tremendous amount of help in the beginning. For example, it helped me to understand what happened to me. It helped me to understand why. It helped me to be able to identify these behaviors that other people were stuck in because of their relational wounds, right? It also helped me to begin to separate and become one person, because two dysfunctional people tend to make up one personality. And so it helped me to realize what I needed to do to separate from that person. And it gave me the validation that I needed, because I always knew something was wrong, something just wasn't right. But that's as far as it went. As far as healing the traumatized personality that I developed, no amount of knowledge about the other person and what happened could heal that. And so when we start to realize that, oh, maybe the person that was abusive had their relational wounds and they were who they were, right? Because we're not going to invalidate what happened. But it helps us to focus on, well, what are my relational wounds? Do I have relational wounds? And if so, how can I heal what's inside of me, what the trauma has left behind in my nervous system? Once we can put the focus on ourselves, that's when it becomes a game changer. And that's exactly why I created the School of Transformation, which to me is like nervous system rehab. It's a live membership. So if you enjoy my videos, make sure you check out the membership, because we do everything live. We do all the inner work together. There are somatic experiencing sessions for yearly members. There are group coaching, live Q&A, trauma release breathwork, EFT workshops. It's really all about putting the focus within, because when we heal the relational wound, it affects every relationship in our life. First, the relationship we have with ourselves, then it trickles down to our children, to our friends, to our family members, to coworkers, and so on. So if you're looking for a resource, make sure you check out the links above.